So these are our top 25, right? As it stands, these are our top 25 in college football. So this was the bracket. This was the bracket that was put up, that was released last night at 8 p.m. that we covered on the stream. Very, very interesting bracket. There was a lot. For the most part, I felt like a good amount of what we saw last night made sense. Like I felt like a good amount of it was legitimate. It made sense. It kind of fell in line with what I was expecting. There were a few surprises and a few things that I wanted to talk about in regards to this. Like as I was just saying, this bracket really means nothing solely due to the fact. Here, let me see if I can move this. I'll move it over just so we can see all the teams. It means nothing almost solely due to the fact that we have 3-4. These teams have 3-4 games left in the season, and now that we're getting to the end of the season, a lot of these teams have to play each other anyway. So it's impossible for this to stay the same way. You know what I mean? But one thing that was interesting to me, first off, I don't know how I feel about Oklahoma being second team out. Considering the fact, like, so one thing that came to the rankings when they talked about the ranking criteria this year was that they were weighing more quality losses and quality wins than they have in previous years. And so if you have a 2-loss team, for example, that's lost to a number 1 and number 5 seed, for example, right? That team will be ranked better than a 1-loss team whose wins were against nobody and whose loss was against nobody. And it's funny, that whole criteria where they're ranking wins and losses, and they're doing this thing where it's like one thing that I was seeing, it was like they're talking about trending losses in the eyeball test. So trending losses make sense. So Oregon or Notre Dame, for example, right? Notre Dame started off the season with 2 losses. Not a good look. Doesn't look like a championship caliber team. But the thing about that Notre Dame, this 2-loss Notre Dame team, is that their first 2 losses, or that their 2 losses were the first 2 games of their season, and they've won out the rest of their season so far, and they've done so convincingly, right? And that point was brought up when people were having an issue with Miami not being on the list. So the thing with Miami, if we switch over to this side here, the problem that people were having with Miami is that you have a Miami team sitting at 18, and you have a Notre Dame team that's ranked 10. But the problem is they're both 2-loss, and this is a Miami team that beat Notre Dame, right? So 2-loss Miami, 2-loss Notre Dame. 2-loss Miami beat Notre Dame early in the season, but is ranked 8 spots below Notre Dame. So there was a lot of tension online with that. But I think that falls to the criteria of trending, where the teams are trending. How we talk about, like, losses at the end of the season look significantly worse. Miami has now lost to Louisville, and they've lost to SMU. I believe that's 2 of their last 3 or 4 games. They're getting to the end of their season, and they've lost 2 games, whereas in the beginning of the season, they looked invincible. Having those losses later in the season looks a little worse than starting the season off with losses. And so that's the tension between Miami and Notre Dame's rankings was one thing I was saying, but the trending in terms of their losses and wins is one thing there. What bothers me is that I keep hearing people talk about the eyeball test, right? The problem that I have with the eyeball test in terms of how good a team looks visually and people's just gut instinct about how a team's performing and will perform is that I feel like it falls too close back into that whole BCS system that we were using before. Now, for y'all that don't know, we have a playoff system where we have 12 teams that will play each other and in this playoff bracket system. Um, what used to happen was we had the BCS system. It was a bowl championship system where the top two teams that went and played in the national championship were voted on. So a committee would get together and vote who the best two teams in college football. The tension with that was you would have an undefeated or one-loss team out in a weak-ass conference that just beat up on everybody that doesn't get into the national championship, where you would have a three-loss Oklahoma, Alabama, etc., that people just thought was a plain better team, and they would end up in a national championship game. But the criteria for that, a significant part of the BCS system's criteria, was the eye test, right? It was how people felt about the team, how they looked, how they thought they would perform in postseason play. I don't like the eye system being applied to the college football bracket. I just don't. I get it. Do I understand it? 100%. My problem is if you're going to do a playoff bracket where you're taking the 12 teams and you're doing, then let's do the record, let's do the strength of schedule, let's do the trending, etc. I don't know if the eye test has a place in a playoff system. I just don't think it works, because then we fall too much into this thing where we're voting based on how we feel, and then we fall back into the same exact thing where, hey, 3-loss so-and-so is better than 1-loss so-and-so. So here goes 3-loss so-and-so. And then you have a 1-loss team in a 1-loss fan base who are up in arms and pissed off because they're like, well, why wouldn't we get in? Why wouldn't we have a shot? That's something that I had been hearing in some of the discourse, and the last post that I made about the brackets last night got a lot of fucking comments on it, so I was kind of going through a lot of that stuff too. But that is something that was kind of iffy there. But even that, like, so for example, we have A&M, but back to the note of this being irrelevant, right? Let's switch back to the bracket. To get back into the back to the point of this whole system, just this whole bracket thing is just for fun. It's just for entertainment. This is the equivalent of when Apple Music puts out their top 100 albums of all time. It doesn't mean anything. It's just to start up discussion, to draw attention, etc. Because we all know that this is not going to be how it is. Because, for example, let's take a look, right? We have Texas A&M as the number 3 team. We have Alabama at 4, Georgia at 5, Ole Miss at 6. Here's the thing about 3, 4, 5, and 6. A&M, if they win out the rest of the season, which they should, is going to the conference championship game. The thing about that is within the next couple of weeks, Alabama has to play Oklahoma, so 4 has to play 12. We'll see what happens there, because if you have a 1-loss Alabama team that loses to Oklahoma, 2-loss Oklahoma that beats number 4 and then wins out the rest of their season, can find their way into the playoffs. Same thing with Alabama. Alabama can lose to Oklahoma and still be in the playoffs. I'm confident in that. People aren't leaving a 2-loss Alabama out of the playoffs. It's been tested, tried, proven. They're not doing it. They're not leaving a 2-loss Alabama out of the playoffs. But the winner of Alabama, Oklahoma, like, we still have an SEC championship to play. So if Alabama loses to Oklahoma, that'll bring them down to 2-loss. Then you have Ole Miss playing A&M in the conference championship, and then one of those teams is going up and one's going down. And I say, and I said this yesterday on stream, and I'll say it again. The winner of the SEC championship, in my opinion, should be the number 1 ranked team in college football. And I say that because if we look at the strength of schedules of these SEC teams, the only reason that this bracket isn't entirely SEC is because it's a conference that cannibalizes itself. If you put Alabama, A&M, Ole Miss, Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, and you scatter them out throughout throughout college football, these teams are dominating and probably not even taking a loss in all reality. They're probably not taking any losses. But because they have to play each other all season long, that's where they rack up their losses. And so, like we said, Alabama has to play Okie in a couple of weeks. A&M has to play, depending on how that goes, A&M is either going to play Alabama or Ole Miss, or Alabama or Georgia, I'm sorry. A&M is either going to play Alabama or Georgia in the conference championship, contingent upon them winning out the rest of their season. So, these rankings will not stay the same. It's just inevitable. Because A&M is going to have to play either 4, 5, or 6 in the conference championship there. Same thing with BYU, right? We're talking about BYU, Texas Tech. People were mad on TikTok because I took Texas Tech over Oregon. Sorry, that's just how I feel. That's just it's legitimate. I didn't just make that something just a bullshit throw a dart at a board, like close my eyes. No, Texas Tech is playing good football. Texas Tech has the number 1 run defense in the country. They're only allowing 75 yards per game, and they have somebody on their D line that's leading the leading college football in sacks. That's a tough defense to play, and I think they're going to show up ready to play football. Oregon's team is young, and Oregon does this thing all the time where they look good in the regular season, and you don't really know how they look until conference championship time and then postseason. So, but the thing about Texas Tech is playing BYU this week. So that's going to be a test to see where both of those teams legitimately stand. I personally think BYU is a better team than Texas Tech. But what that would mean for the bracket is that BYU stays the same or moves up, and Texas Tech falls out of that number 8 spot, possibly falling out of the playoffs altogether. So there's a situation where I think BYU can lose, an undefeated BYU can lose and still find their way into the playoffs. Texas Tech, I don't know if they stay in the playoff picture if they lose to BYU this weekend. So the 8 and 7 spot is it doesn't make sense, there as well. And then in addition to that, we have first team out being Texas, and then we're still talking about this undefeated A&M team, right? So I misspoke when I just said that Texas is that A&M's next test will be in the conference championship, because last game of the season, rivalry week, all the in-state rivalries, you got A&M facing off against Texas, right? A&M can lose to Texas, and then depending on how they perform in the conference championship, can still find their way into the playoffs. If Texas loses to A&M, Texas is out. There's no shot for them. There's no way. They're already the first team out. It would take a miracle for a 3-loss Texas team to find their way into the playoffs. It's just not likely. Some would say impossible, but I won't say that. Some would say it. So those rankings are going to change there again as well. That's really a make or break for Texas. The thing about Texas is playing their best football now, right? Texas didn't hit their stride until week 6. Texas looked like a run-of-the-mill, sort of like, middle-of-the-pack SEC football team until week 5 or 6. And then from then, Arch Manning he's found his stride there. He's gotten that offensive moving. He's got that offense moving. It's opened up the run game. He's looking like a top caliber quarterback that we all anticipated him to be preseason. That Texas team is looking significantly better than how they were looking week 3. And honestly, I wrote them off. I just be completely honest. I wrote them off. I wasn't proud of, I wasn't happy with Arch's performance. I wasn't happy with how the team looked. But they found their stride as of week 6, and they're playing solid fucking football. So that's really a make or break game for Texas. If Texas really wants a chance at that playoffs, they got to win out the rest of their season. and then they gotta beat A&M. They have to beat A&M, and they have to be 2-loss, or they have to only be 2-loss going into the college football playoffs. The thing is with Texas, in addition to the A&M game, last game of the season, here's the thing with Texas. November 15th, we got number 5 and number 11. Georgia got to play Texas, right? So Georgia's playing Texas as well. So this is what I'm saying when I say that the SEC is a conference that cannibalizes itself. You have Texas as the first team out, ranked 11, and in order for them to get into the playoffs, they got to beat Georgia at number 5, and they got to beat undefeated A&M at number 3. Like, what kind of fucking gauntlet is that for them to go through? You know what I'm saying? But that's just how it goes in the SEC. So we'll see. You know, the interesting thing with Georgia, Texas, since Texas has entered the SEC last few years, it's been a thing where, you know, there's a new forming rivalry with Georgia and Texas. And it's in the early stages now. When I say that, you might not even look at it as a rivalry. But there's a specific energy that comes out when Texas has to play Georgia. And I mean, shit, bro, they played twice last year. It was a possibility that they would even play twice and then see each other again in the fucking national championship, depending on how the playoff brackets worked, because they played in the regular season and played in the SEC championship. So I think as time goes on, I think we'll end up seeing I think we're seeing the initial stages of a blossoming, nice, pretty little rivalry between Georgia and them boys over there in Texas as a result of them moving to the SEC. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how that goes. These teams, they do not have an easy path. Like, Texas just barely squeaked on by Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt I wanted to see up on the board, but it just didn't happen this year, unfortunately. I don't think they have a chance either. But they barely squeaked on by Vandy. But then they got to go through A&M and they got to go through Georgia, and if they want to play a shot at the playoffs. But what that means is that Georgia also has to do that. Georgia can lose to Texas and still find their way into the playoffs. A&M can lose to Texas and still find their way into the playoffs. So it's really make or break for Texas. The pressure is on Texas, where they have to beat Georgia, have to beat A&M. Georgia doesn't have to beat Texas. They don't have to beat, or A&M doesn't have to beat Texas. But what that means for Georgia and A&M can lose to Texas and be fine. I don't think they have any other tests on their schedule aside from that. Georgia still also has to go through Georgia Tech, aside from Texas. That's a game that I don't ever put money on. As a dog fan, there's 3 games I don't ever put money on. It's Alabama, Florida, and Georgia Tech. And that's a Georgia Tech team with 1 loss who, in my opinion, I think that Georgia Tech team should be in this playoff picture right up there in possibly in Georgia's place or Virginia's place. If not in Virginia's place, I think that they should Memphis. Like, what? They should be in either Memphis or Virginia spot. But that's a Georgia Tech team that could easily end up in this playoff picture as well, depending on how the rest of their season goes and how the ACC championship goes. So we'll see, bro. It is Jesus. You got Oklahoma playing Bama. You got Oklahoma and Bama, and then the week after that, you got Oklahoma and Missouri. Like, Oklahoma's got to go through it. They got to go through Missouri as well, and Missouri's not on this board. That's a solid Missouri team. That's a solid Missouri team. They're ranked number 22 in the country. That's a solid Missouri team. They're nobody to look past. That's gonna be a football game too. So we'll see how that goes. We will see how that goes. But I'm you know, like I said, this playoff bracket is all for fun to look at and things like that. But I am definitely interested to see how the next few weeks of college football go as a result.